Courtney Voss is one of my colleagues in nutritional therapy. She's also become a friend. I really enjoy Courtney. I think that you're really going to enjoy listening to Courtney too. So, she helps men and women transform their health. She has a 12-week transformational health program. She's a wealth of information. And I really wanted to have her on to talk about her personal story because I really enjoy talking to Courtney about anxiety and about her experience that she's had on that whole journey through 18 years of medication and getting off the medication and all of that. So I thought it was really wonderful for her to come on and be so open and honest. We always really appreciate that. And she's very inspiring. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Courtney as much as I enjoyed talking to Courtney. Courtney, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you on.
I am so excited to be here, Kelly. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, I wanted to have you on for a while, and so I'm glad that we're finally getting to this. We have a lot, I'm sure, to discuss.
Mhm.
So, and I think what I really wanted to talk about was anxiety and how we cannot over identify with our symptoms because you bring up some really good points around that. But I thought we might start by talking about how is it that you know so much about anxiety and why you're so passionate about mental health?
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm excited to dive into this with you because it does make up so much of my story. So, I'm 41 right now. Whenever I was 18, I started experiencing my first anxiety attack, and I didn't know, or panic attack. I didn't know what it was at the time.
Mhm.
I just knew that I was laying in my bed and I popped up out of nowhere. I was watching something on TV. I don't even remember what it was, but I popped up out of nowhere and I instinctively tucked my knees into my chest and kind of put my arms around my knees. And I just had this intense body sensation that really was started from the tips of my toes and went to like the strands of my hair. It was very intense and visceral and fear driven. Again, I had no idea what it was at the time. I just knew that it scared the crap out of me. So fast forward a little bit, I graduate my senior year in high school, and these start picking up in intensity and frequency. So I went to the only person I knew who to go to at that time, which was my grandmother. She's always been my person, but she worked for a psychiatrist for decades. So I went to her because I didn't know what was going on. And, she scheduled me and she did what she knew best to do at that time. So she scheduled me an appointment with the psychiatrist that she worked for. I spent about 10 minutes with him, and I left his office with a prescription and a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder. So I struggled with that for about 18 years. Even medicated. I was given an antidepressant, and I just
Mhm.
subscribed to this diagnosis and the symptoms that go along with it, right? Like I met every expectation these psychiatrists and doctors had when they hand you this diagnosis. And yeah, so it's been so much a part of my story. And I just, I don't know where you want to go from here.
Mhm.
I can keep rattling on, certainly, but I got to this place in 2018 where I had a breakdown, and
Mhm.
it just became evident that the medication was no longer serving its useful purpose for me. And
Mhm.
there had to be another way.
Got
So
it.
it was in 2018 where, I just started breaking down these walls, and it's led me to where I am today.
Nice. Okay. Yes, like so many people's stories. I mean,
Mhm.
you do what you think you can do. You get handed a prescription. When you get handed the prescription and this GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, how are you feeling? I mean, was there a sense of relief? Like, oh, I have a name for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was happening for you then,
Yeah.
if you remember?
That's exactly what it was. I had a name for this. Right, wrong, or indifferent. I had a solution. And that there was so much comfort in that at the time.
Yeah.
And there was so much more to it than that. Like, oh, well, this makes sense, right? I've got a family history of this. I told it again, I subscribed to all of these things that were, all of these programs that were fed to me at the time. But I remember him before he wrote the prescription. I remember him telling me that some people can take these for a short period of time and then come off of them. And then some people have to take them for the rest of their life. So we'll just see how that ends up with you. I remember him verbatim saying that to me and thinking like, oh, okay, so I could come off of these. But again, I was on them for 18 years. And
Right, right.
yeah,
Yeah, but we could really unpack that, and I think we
absolutely.
will, about because that feels like such that's a normal thing to happen. I don't want to say that doctors are wrong for that. That's the way that they are taught. It's the toolboxes, that's what they have to give to
Right.
you. He thinks he's doing the right thing for you. And then not realizing all of the consequences that could come with that. And most people don't. And if you, I don't care what age you are, you feel a relief. You're like, oh, okay, great. Here's the solution. I have a doctor that's helping me. And so you head down this road of, yeah,
Yeah.
of what we do.
Yep.
Yeah. And I guess I mean, would you say that the medication was helpful in some ways at that time, knowing what you know now?
It's hard to say if it was truly helpful or if I was just looking for a way
Mm.
out or, a way to cope. And you're so, I really do think that the placebo kind of effect comes into play there for sure. There's so much like, I really, when you're struggling with something like that, and when you're struggling with a lot of things, but in this situation, it was anxiety, you're susceptible to suggestibility so much because you're just in such a vulnerable place, and you fall into this like kind of like victim kind of place. So I don't know how much of it was placebo or how much of it was the prescription, doing anything for me. I will say that I cycled through a few before we finally settled on one that I was on for 8 years. And then I switched to another one that I was on for another subsequent 8 years. So
And
I don't know.
yeah, and do you mind which are they,
No, not at all.
SSRIs, or which medications?
Yeah. So we started with, do you want me to just run through the gamut? We started with Paxil.
Yep.
I was on that for a very short period of time and started experiencing side effects. And then he switched me to Zoloft, which felt like nothing, like I wasn't on anything. Then we switched to Effexor
Yeah.
XR, which
Mhm.
I was on for 8 years, Effexor XR. And then from Effexor XR, we switched to Celexa or citalopram, the generic version of that.
Mhm.
And I was on that for about 8 years. So with that one, every time a side effect presented itself, and there's so many, I would go to my doctor and they would give you another prescription. Like, oh, well, that one's not doing enough. Let's give you bupropion. That one's not doing enough. Let's give you something for sweating. Like anything that presented, you were giving another prescription. And it got to this point where I was in my 20s and I'm on 9 different medications.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. I'm in my 20s. So yeah, those are the different handful of ones that I was on in my history.
Yep. And that's a pretty typical, like, we try these things, and the side effects. What were some of the side effects
Oh
that,
gosh.
I mean, yeah, a
Yeah,
lot of stuff, right?
a lot. So weight gain,
Yep.
loss of libido, complete loss of libido.
Yep.
Um, gosh, I did experience like
Mhm.
excessive sweating. So he gave me something and it just like dried me up.
Like a prude.
I mean, I was shriveled. So it was excessive sweating. I started experiencing thyroid issues at that
Yep.
time.
Mhm.
Gosh,
Yeah,
yeah,
because then your
it's
body's trying everything it can
yeah,
to recalibrate, readjust to this stuff that you're putting into your system. And
yeah.
okay. Which just feels like a nightmare, but when you're in it, did you feel like it was a nightmare? It was like, oh, this is just my life.
I remember having instances like again, you would go and they would be like, oh, well, that's what you're experiencing XYZ disease or syndrome or whatever. So here's another pill. And initially you get that when you're subscribing to that mentality or that kind of model, you get kind of relief from it. So I understand it. But then when it continues or when it leads to something else, or when you end up in your 20s and you're on 9 different medications, you start to kind of scratch your head and you're like, gosh, is this really my life? So yeah, it's,
Okay,
you do get a sense of relief initially, and then until the next thing pops up, and then it's like, oh man, something else.
right. Well, you're super healthy now.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, like, then were you also like exercising and eating I mean, you're a
Oh man.
nutritional therapist too, like
Hmm.
me. So
Hmm.
what was were you into that stuff or no?
Not at all. Oh my
Okay.
gosh, yeah, it was terrible. I ate the worst, anything out of a box. That was my, or
Mhm.
a package. That was my diet. And that's been just kind of my life story, until I changed things around. But yeah, I ate like crap. I had chronic fatigue, so I slept all the time. I would sleep 10 hours a night, and then I would live my day to day by when I could take a 2 hour nap. That had to be like built into my day. I used to joke that I would tell people like, well, my what is it? My alternator just doesn't recharge. That
Yep.
part in your car.
Uh-huh.
My alternator just doesn't recharge. I don't know what to tell you. And I didn't know what to attribute that to. I just knew that I was always tired. I had terrible skin. I was translucent. I was so pale. I never went outside because I couldn't tolerate the heat. I had debilitating low back pain that almost resulted in surgery. Lifelong history of chronic, constipation. It just, no, I was struggling
Yeah. You
for
were a
sure.
hot mess.
I was a hot mess.
Yeah. I was like, you're really cute. So I'm like, you were a cute hot mess,
Thank you.
right?
Yeah,
So
I wasn't so cute back then. Yeah.
yeah, I wondered, like, if you just looked like skin yeah, because you were pale, all the things.
Hmm.
Okay, alright, so at what 2018, something
Hmm.
happens, and you wake up, and you're like, "Hell to the no."
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
what
I
walk me through
had
that.
the most amazing experience now that, in retrospect, right? It was incredibly painful to go through it. But so I've worked in corporate America, and I started in 2011. And it was a well-known chemicals manufacturing company in our area. And if you worked for this company, like this is where you were going to retire. This was the company to work for. That's, kind of the story that I subscribed to. And as I got further along in that company, and the roles that I was in, it just became more and more toxic. And it just the people that I was working for, the leadership, and not to mention that it was a chemicals manufacturer, the
Yeah,
environment that I was working under. Anyway, so it just, enough became enough. My anxiety was at the worst it has ever been in my entire life. And mind you, I was still medicated at this point.
right.
So I made the decision to go work for a different company, a competitor that company had sold some assets to this competitor. It was doing the exact same role, but I wasn't responsible for people under me. So, I could just go back to doing just the work and not have people responsibility, which is what I was looking forward to. So it was in that decision to leave this company and go work doing the exact same thing for a different small company that it broke. There was some little piece that just broke. It was like this identity that I had subscribed to for so long, for the last 7 years and working with this company, that I was like, it was the shedding of that just, all of the walls came tumbling down, all of them. And it was, I affectionately call it the breakdown of 2018, because that's exactly what it was. At one point for a period of time, I was seeing two different psychologists a week, just because I needed someone to talk me off of that ledge. It was so, so painful. There were nights there where I experienced, I think it's called akathisia. It's what Jordan Peterson experienced with some of his withdrawal symptoms, where it's just like you literally want to crawl out of your body. That you just can't stop moving. It kind of makes my heart beat just thinking about it.
Mm,
It was
sure.
absolutely, you're not sleeping at all. It was absolutely terrible.
Awful. Yeah.
But it was that experience that this little seed got planted, where just the world opened up for me. Like,
Okay.
seriously, I mean, we can go into what, different things kind of presented at that time. It was utterly divine. And, I'm so thankful for the universe for putting all of these things in my lap. But that's ultimately what ended up happening.
Mhm.
I kind of broke from this model that I fully subscribed to. and identified with, which is why I'm so passionate about not identifying with things.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so we can totally unpack that. There's a lot there, but yeah,
Yeah, because
that's
it sounds like it was a soul thing. It sounds like it was a divine intervention that felt like, I'm going to die here. This is
yes,
awful,
yes,
but did not break you, actually
yeah,
broke you open, which
yeah,
happens only in hindsight can we say, oh, I'm so grateful. Oh, that was so helpful.
so true.
Because in the midst of it, you think there's no way this is sustainable. Like, I am not going to make it out of this
Yeah, that's
unbelievable
exactly what it felt like.
hell.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you did.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think I'd love to hear personally just about like some of the what feels divine, like what landed in your lap that you feel like was really a soul thing.
Yeah. So what initially landed in my lap was the opportunity to leave that company. So that
Okay.
was the first thing that landed in my lap. And then the second thing being open to, expanding to going somewhere else, to not continuing living under this model. Those were the first things because I could have been that wasn't the first time that opportunity landed in my lap. It had presented itself a year earlier. And I was like, no, I've got so much going for me here. There's so much opportunity here. And I shut it down. And it presented again whenever I was at my lowest, when I was at my like breaking point. It was just like, yes, like let's jump. So those were the first two things. Once I got out of, I was seeing these two different psychologists, these two different therapists. I went with the first one that could get me in.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say,
Just
why did we do two?
yeah,
Okay.
I didn't have a therapist at the time, so I really went with the first person that could get me in.
Right.
And while I was seeing that guy, another one opened up, and thank goodness, because the first guy ended up firing him for some inappropriate things that I don't think you should say to anyone that's ever in that vulnerable position, with respect to the loss of life. It was I never had the desire to commit suicide. That was never on my radar, but I felt so miserable that I could empathize with
Right.
people.
Yeah.
And so he made a comment. He made a comment one time, and it was just about like, well, it was about Robin Williams, and he was like, "Oh, well, he got really cynical there towards the end. Like, it was, what a waste. Like, you don't want to do something like that." It was very kind of um,
Huh.
discompassionate and inappropriate. And it was when he said that where I was just like, okay, thank goodness I had this
We're
other guy
breaking up, but
we're
okay.
breaking up. And please, dear God, don't ever say that to anyone else. So I had this other
Right.
guy who was absolutely amazing. He's still a part of my life today. I attribute so much of this growth and coming off of medication to the work that I did with him. I don't have enough good things to say about him, but it was in working with him that I was led to cognitive behavioral techniques. I read a book by Dr. Kelly Brogan. I don't know if you're
No, yeah,
familiar
yeah.
with her. Yeah,
Yeah.
but she wrote a book called, well, she's written several, but the one that I read, I believe, was Own Your Mind.
Uh-huh.
And it was when I read that book, here she is, this turncoat psychiatrist who first part of her career was dedicated to getting people on medication. And then, the next part of her career is dedicated to getting people off medication. It was in reading this book where I was just like, wait a second. So you're telling me that I may not even have like a mental health disorder? You're telling me that like this medication really may not even be like, it planted like all of these seeds that I couldn't even conceive of prior to this. But I was cracked open in such a way that I would read these things and it was just like, clutch the
Huh.
pearls, like
Yeah.
seriously.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's kind of how things presented itself. I got into meditation, I got into yoga, I got into more books, I got into nutrition, and it just literally the dominoes started falling. And just thank goodness I was in a place to be receptive. I'll tell you something else quickly.
Yeah.
When I was still long before I had my breakdown of 2018, a book presented itself to me, and it was, I forget what it was exactly called. Her name is Sarah Wilson, and it was called like, First We Have to Make the Beast Beautiful or Pretty. I don't know if you've ever heard of this book.
No.
I got 30 pages in, and this author is talking, it's about the beast being anxiety.
Okay.
right? First, we have to make the beast anxiety beautiful. I'm 30 pages into this book, and she's like, you have to give up sugar. I literally close the book, throw it, and I'm like, this is so ridiculous that you think me giving up sugar is going to have any effect on my anxiety.
Yeah.
So Sarah, I apologize. But gosh, I
You
wasn't at a place where I was receptive to it at the time.
right, you weren't open. And I hear that a lot too. Like I kind of wonder like what is it? If we had the secret sauce to opening people before you hit rock freaking bottom,
Yeah,
like just to stay open, but I don't think you can. I don't think
I don't think you can
I
either. It's
hear
such a good question.
over and over and over again, people who pivot, who find their way out, they can recall a time where they just were suddenly open. And
Yeah.
they often kind of what you're talking about too is like, I'm going to take ownership of this. And I'm taking ownership of my life and everything in it, including the problems, and I'm turning the ship around.
Mm,
If it's possible to turn the ship around, I'm turning it around
yeah,
because it sounds like that's kind of what happened for you. And
absolutely.
then once you're open, it all comes to you.
Yeah.
All the pieces start to come together, and you're like, oh, and then, oh, it's just, yeah. But before that, you can't see what you can't see. And it seems ridiculous to think that food and sugar has
Mm-mm.
anything to do with your mood.
Yeah, I love you worded that so well. In fact, as you were talking, it made me think of like when you're energetically aligned to things,
Yes.
right? You just kind
Mhm.
of like attract them to you. And so if I was not energetically aligned to some of those things that, may or may not have presented, or maybe they didn't even present because I would have blocked them. But once I had that shift, I just had this like calling of these things. I put my requests out into the universe and they just kept presenting. It's so you worded it so well, but it's such a good point because we want, as practitioners, we want so badly to reach to people before they get to that point.
Yes.
Like, you're struggling right now, I can help you right now, and there's no, we always get them when they're in the thralls, and it's like, dear God, if you could, I tried to reach you sooner. But I did this thing recently. I posted this on social media. Like, people will hear your message in their own time. And we just have to, we can just plant these seeds, right? Along the way. And hopefully it'll be there when they need it. And they'll be open to it.
Right. Yeah. If we can get ourselves to just be open, yeah, well, as a practitioner, you're right. We're always like, what would create that little opening?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about whatever feels like the next best thing to talk about. Like you have made, I mean, you a 180, like
Mm.
complete change. Did you ever work for the smaller company? I mean, did you make it there? And it's okay. So at some
Yeah.
point you left there too, and then you became a nutritional therapist. So I don't want to skip a part, but
Yeah.
before we get to some other things.
Yeah, so I did go and work for that other company, much smaller, and some of the people that I worked with there, actually
Mhm.
I worked with at the previous company, which is how those opportunities kept presenting them. And it was exactly what I needed at the time.
Okay.
It was very small, it was very intimate. I didn't have people leadership responsibilities. I could really just focus on me. But I do remember perhaps my first year there, where 6 months to a year there, where I was very guarded. I had a dear friend that worked there, and he was an older gentleman. Again, we worked together at the previous company. He was a hugger. He, always, wanted to, know how my weekend was. He always wanted to chat, and I would just completely like shut him off. I was in such a place of discomfort at that time because I was still in this transition of shedding to like, I feel like my nervous system was just, it still wasn't in parasympathetic. It was still in this, like, stuck in this fight or flight. So
Mhm.
it's me constantly working against that. I remember at that small company, I would go to the bathroom and I would be washing my hands. I've talked about this in other podcasts, but it was still so dark and heavy of a time that I couldn't look at myself in the mirror when I would wash my hands after using the restroom, because I was so terrified and scared of and uncomfortable with what was looking back at me, because it wasn't me.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
this poor coworker, that I just treated in this way just because I couldn't, I couldn't accept what he was trying to give me, at that time, which was just kind of, nurturing in his own way.
mhm.
But so it took like 6 months to a year of like really digging, being in the trenches, working with my therapist and doing all of these other kinds of things. I'd lost my firstborn, my dog, back in 2016, and we adopted Suki, who you see here in the background, in 2018. So it's just kind of like all of these things, but I don't even know an exact time um, where it was just like kind of like a flash of what was going on, or what it was that I was going through. It was just a slow progression,
Yeah,
of experiencing all of these things. And
mhm.
oh, I know. Okay, with regard to diet, do you want to dive into diet? Because that's
Yeah.
really kind of like,
Well,
okay,
yeah, because I also wanna know, like, how it was getting off the medication. Because
yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a good point. Okay, so we'll start with diet because losing or getting off of the medication, was after we had already started making the dietary change.
okay,
So
alright.
let's see, this was September 1st, 2019. So I will say at the end of August, we had a good friend from my husband's high school. It's one of his high school best friends come by the house, back when we lived in Texas. And he came in and he had lost so much weight. I think he was like 25 pounds down. He looked great. And my husband was asking him, like, what have you been doing? And he started talking about the ketogenic diet. Now, I had heard rumblings of the ketogenic diet by others and, in corporate America. And I was like, there's no way that eating bacon and butter and, all that kind of stuff is there. There's just no way. Like, it's definitely packaged processed foods where health resides, right? Like, I just couldn't conceive of it at that time. But he started, he's talking about the ketogenic diet. And when he left our house that day, my husband and I were sitting on the couch, and, he just kind of turns towards me and he says, I really want to try I really want to try the ketogenic diet. And I was like, okay, if you want to try it, we're going to do it the right way. Like, we're not going to just like do this, like, bull crap, eat bacon and that kind of stuff. Like, we're going to do it the right way. So I did some research, and on September 1st was our first day of the ketogenic diet. And we did that for about 5.5 months. So it was September 1st to February 19th. But along that way, I started feeling so good on the ketogenic diet. Well, let me stop and say that I had already decided
Mhm.
when we did the ketogenic diet that I wanted to come off this medication at some point, because I had already read Dr. Kelly Brogan's book.
Right.
I had already decided that I wanted to come off of this medication. So it
Mhm.
was when I was doing the ketogenic diet where I started to kind of like peel back on the number of milligrams. And, I had my therapist fully on board. I had a psychiatrist who had prescribed supplemental, anxiety aids at that time, who was like, okay, I mean, if you want to try to come off of it, let's try to come off of it. And
Okay,
we did it
good.
like so painstakingly slow
Yeah.
because I had been on it for 18 years. I just didn't know if my body, I didn't know if it knew what it needed to do because I had interfered with it so long. So we start the ketogenic diet. I start tapering off of the medications. And on January 26th of 2020, I took my last Celexa, or my last citalopram. On February 19th of 2020, we switched from keto to carnivore
Uh-huh.
because I was still dealing with some like excessive bloat. Like, I never ate vegetables in my life. Like, my aunt gave me broccoli as a kid and I loved it, but that was the only vegetable. Like, my mom didn't like vegetables, so we didn't get vegetables. So I was eating so many vegetables on the ketogenic diet that I was
Mhm.
just like still dealing with this like significant stomach distension and bloat. So I told my husband, okay, we did this keto thing because you wanted to, and we've gotten some great results on it. He lost 45 pounds, I had lost 10 pounds. And I said, now I want to try carnivore just for 30 days because I just want to see if it moves the needle on this bloat. And he's like, okay, let's do it. He's, oh my gosh, like the best support system ever. So he was
Right.
totally on board with it. And then that's where we left. Like, we never, it went way past 30 days.
Yeah, right.
It went for years. I will still say that we're still animal based to this day. I jokingly say we're 95% animals, 4% coffee, and 1% cruciferous vegetables.
Yeah, that's so funny. But I mean, it
Yeah.
really has worked for you. It
Yeah.
has been, obviously, your skin is great, your
Thank
energy
you.
is great. You now live in Costa Rica, so we have to talk about the outdoor piece of the puzzle because that's a huge piece.
Yeah.
But you were able to get off the medication, which is huge. It's so hard for people. People have such a hard time, and it makes sense to me that you already had the nutrition piece in place
Mm.
because that to me is foundational. If you don't really have that, it's harder, I think,
Yeah.
from what I've seen.
Yeah. I will let's back up there because
Okay.
I had seeds where I say mindset really had already been planted even before
Mhm.
we changed to the ketogenic diet. And part of the reason I say that is, again, I had already read Dr. Kelly Broken's book. I had already, started doing meditation and yoga and these kinds of things. So my mindset had already been
Mhm.
opened up, and then otherwise I don't even think I would have entertained. I think I just would have like shut them down and been like, there's no way the ketogenic. So I do think mindset really presented itself first
First.
to
Mhm.
allow me to open up to the nutritional space.
Got
Now,
it.
with all of that said, I
Mm.
do wonder, and you probably see this in your, your work with clients these days, what if I had brought in, some of these other lifestyle things like far sooner than when I did actually bring them in, talking about getting out in nature and sunlight and grounding and all those kinds of things. I just wonder, would that have expedited it? Would I have needed to go to the depths that I did with nutrition? I'm glad I finally got there. I think there's
Mm.
many ways up the mountain. I really do.
I do too.
Um, but it just makes you wonder,
I
like,
know. I do wonder too. I wonder the same thing. Like if I'd started with circadian rhythms, would I, but whatever, coulda, woulda,
yeah,
shoulda, it doesn't matter. We get where we get and it's our own journey.
yeah,
And I think you're right. Having some of the mindset pieces and the space because
the space.
meditation and yoga and even some exercise, it definitely helps increase the fuse because you went from so stressed, your body was so stressed, not just because the work that you were doing in the original company and the corporate and all that, but your body was, one of the biggest stressors we have is the wrong circadian timing. So it was kind of layered in there. But now you've got a bigger fuse, less stress, and you can start to work on the layers of pieces. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah,
Nailed it.
yeah. And I don't think I'll ever not be animal based. I don't it just works so beautiful for me
I
personally.
love it.
It's just yeah, it's such a relief,
I
honestly.
love it. And it's so simple. Like few rare occasions, we probably do this about once a week where I'll, have some broccoli or something like that. And it's like, it's so simple when you're, most of the week you're eating just animals because, it's so few ingredients. It's like these one ingredient things. But the moment you're like, oh, maybe we'll do like a cauli mash. It's all of these dishes and all of these different ingredients. And it's like, you can't wait for it to be over so you can just get back to the basics. You can
Yeah.
just get back to simplicity. So
Yeah.
that's another reason. I just love it. It's so satiating and nourishing, and simple.
Yeah. Yes, I 100% agree with that. So, is there anything else before we leave this that you wanted to just talk about in terms of lifestyle stuff? Because, I mean, y'all up and moved. We're now a nutritional therapist. Like
Mhm.
everything has shifted, and we don't have to go deep into all of it. But I just think, it is pretty amazing what can happen. What does happen for people when you completely change your whole life around health and wellness?
Yeah. Um, I agree. I agree with that statement. I'm just trying to think if there were any more significant points along the way. No, I think when I saw such profound shifts in my health, again, like when, even just when we were on the ketogenic diet before I had even gone to animal based, being able to reduce my thyroid medication,
Oh
the
yeah.
back pain that
Yeah.
completely went away. I mean, literally, I thought I was going to have back surgery. I was told I had, disc degradation on my L4 and L5. Thankfully, the surgeon was like, years ago, he was like, let's try physical therapy before we do, any kind of like back surgery or anything like that. And I did get relief from the physical therapy when I was doing the physical therapy. But then I changed my diet and that back pain completely goes away. So it tells you inflammation was absolutely involved, right?
Right.
So I forget where I was going with all of this, but I just saw so much of the needle move on these things that I was experiencing where I was just like, I've got to dig into this nutrition stuff. And then you start following like Judy Cho was like, she was someone that I just really like dug into her work at the time. And she was Mary Ruddick. And they were both people that I years ago just like really dug into their work and really resonated with their messaging and those kinds of things. And both of them had suggested the nutritional therapy practitioner program. Because once you get results in this, like you said this at the beginning of the call, once you like experience the, profoundness of all of this healing for yourself, it's like, you go tell it on the mountain, right?
Yeah.
It's like, go, you want to help as many people as possible. You want to help people stop suffering or not suffer to begin with. So it was like, how do you do that? Well, unfortunately, a lot of people hang their hats on certifications.
Yeah.
So, it's not just going to, my N=1 a lot of times is not enough for people. So I went to nutritional therapy practitioner school and got my certification there. And I think I got that in 2022. And I've been working with clients ever since. And I just am so fulfilled in this work that it's like, I tell my clients, part of the reason I want you to succeed is because you give me my dopamine hit.
Yeah.
Like I love it's so, and like, it's so amazing to see the results, the clients you're working with get. I'm so glad to be finally doing this and instead of what I was doing before. I absolutely think that had a place. It,
Sure.
it got me to where I am today. Absolutely. But I'm so glad it finally landed in this space and I'm loving it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm, super excited for you. It's really amazing to see your journey continue to blossom. So,
Thank you.
yeah. And I see you outside all the time. So you're doing, because once you open up to all of it, y'all sort of end up here in the space of, oh, sunlight's a nutrient. Oh, huh. And
Yeah.
a bunch of other things that we didn't know back.
Yeah.
We didn't know. So let's talk about not over identifying with our symptoms because that's, and
Yeah.
people who are in a space of suffering and like, well, you were able to do it, but I don't know if I would be able to do it. And the whole, well, I have a family history and I had to all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to hear your perspective too, and the work that you have with clients and how this has presented and some of the work you've done with them too. But for me personally, there's a guy, David Bayer, and I'm not sure what his role is, but he's very into like neuroscience and mindset and that kind of stuff. And I really did recently stumble across his stuff, but I love it. But he has this quote where he says, the mind is a goal achieving machine. So if the goals that I'm giving my mind are, well, I have this family history, and so I'm doomed to, experience these mental health issues or whatever your family history may be, diabetes, insert diagnosis here. The brain is going to live up to that. So like, then you start just kind of, if you resonate with that, then you just kind of start picking apart these stories or these programs that you've believed all of these years. And again, the cookie starts to crumble, for lack of a better analogy. Surely I could come up with a better one than a cookie, but the wall starts to come down. It's like, holy crap, what if I just change my mindset around this one thing? Like, what if I'm not a victim? What if there's far more at play than just a family history? Like it's what if all of these kinds of things. And I just think that because the mind is a goal achieving machine, like, what if we start to tell ourselves a different story? What if we stop identifying with some of these things that aren't serving us, that are keeping us stuck or, in a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset, kind of like all of these things.
Yeah.
So I always we have all of these words, these negative words that we use. If you just listen to people talk or even just listen to yourself talk, like should is one of them. I hate the word should, and I still use it, but I try to catch myself using that word, or like I am, or I have, like what
What
follows that
follows that?
statement.
Yes.
Yeah. What follows that is so, so significant.
Mhm.
I have anxiety. I am anxious. Like, oh, here's the mind on board, like totally meeting those goals and expectations.
Mhm.
Like, well, how does an anxious person react? How does someone that has anxiety react? Like, we need to meet, we need to meet that identity. We need to meet that, identity. So it's breaking this kind of this the way that we're talking to ourselves, and the words that we're using, and using a different, really just adopting a new language model that can make such a huge difference.
Right.
So I am curious, like, how have you seen this and your work with clients? Because I see it all the time.
Well, it's
Is
so
this
much.
something?
Yeah, it's a lot easier with clients, I can say,
Yeah.
like, because then you can catch it, and I recently threw up a post. I was really struggling on vacation with my family, and I wanted to be honest about it. I mean, I'm in a beautiful place, I'm doing all the things, and yet I was still experiencing a lot of anxiousness in a capacity that I'm okay with anxiousness when it's appropriate. Like, if something's important to me and I
Mhm.
feel a little anxious, we're not going to get rid of it. We want some of it. It's
Mm.
when it's debilitating, right? And so I threw up that post about, and I said something, my anxiety. And you responded, and I was like, that's such a good reminder. It's not my, like, don't attach
Right.
so much to it. It's just the anxiety.
Yeah.
It's
The
just
anxiety, the
the
symptoms of
anxiety. The
anxiety. Yeah.
symptoms are not me.
Yes.
So I see that, of course, it's much easier with clients to
Absolutely.
say, hey, what are you saying to yourself? What's the story around that?
Yeah.
How might you want, because the subconscious programming, there are so many things that we're just not aware that they're running the show. They're
Yeah.
running a lot of
Yeah.
our life, and we're just not paying attention to it. So, and I've always been really like, don't should on yourself. Are you shooting on yourself again? Like,
I
the
love that.
language really does matter
Yeah.
in these, and I mean, I was a huge fan of all of the new agey people back in the '80s, where it's like, "Be careful with I am," Wayne Dyer, like,
Ah,
"I am," whatever follows that is really powerful.
yeah.
So what are you saying to yourself? So I really appreciated that you brought that up, and as a reminder, I was like, "Yeah, of course."
Yeah.
Being
You
really
know,
careful.
it's so interesting because were you not, correct me if I'm wrong, were you not in Rome at that time? Was that
No.
post in Rome or Italy?
No, that post was actually in the BVI, the British
Oh, okay.
Virgin
Okay.
Islands. Yeah.
I thought you were in Rome at that time, which is funny because we went to Rome in 2018 and it was, after the breakdown, and I was experiencing terrible
Terrible
anxiety
anxiety.
symptoms. So again, you're in this beautiful place, like
Yeah.
surrounded by just like so much history, and, a place that you've always wanted to go. And man, did anxiety present itself. So I really, in more ways than just identifying with anxiety at that time, maybe subconsciously, but I really resonated with that post.
Right. So, yeah. Well, we could talk about Rome too, like travel and the
Mm.
anxiousness, and I do. So I struggle with this, Courtney, a little bit, because I'm like, I mean, I like calling it what it is. It
Mm-hmm.
is what it is. I'm not embarrassed to say, right? And if you know, not identify with it, but if you identify what's happening, then you can take the next step, which is, what do I need? What is my
Yeah.
nervous system trying to say to me? And I think part of that post in particular, my frustration is, I do all the things. I don't
Yeah.
drink, I don't smoke, I eat really nutritious food. I do the sunrise, I'm doing all the things. And so
Yeah.
it's sometimes very just not that surprising or whatever. But when anxiety presents itself, it sort of
Mm.
pisses me off, where I'm like, really?
Yeah. I'm doing all of this and you're still going to rear your ugly head.
Yeah.
So I want to touch on a few things because
Yeah.
I realize there's different, and I'm not saying that mine's right, but here's why I commented what I commented
Yes.
is I don't personally
Yeah.
view anxiety as an emotion. I personally view anxiety as a physiological response in the body.
Yes.
Now, I've touched in with like Nicole Vignola from Nicole Neuroscience and Naz Neuro. I've touched in with them and I'm like, is anxiety an emotion or is it a physiological response? And they're like, both. So,
Mhm.
but I don't personally view anxiety as emotion. I personally view it as a physiological response to an emotion that I am feeling. And for
Like,
me,
yes.
like fear was the biggest one for me.
Right.
Um, so I'm in a foreign country. I'm at these like amazing landmarks, but I'm surrounded by, a bunch of people of a different, foreign nationality. There's people from all walks of life. I don't speak their language. I'm worried if my husband's enjoying what I had on the itinerary. Like all of these things were presenting themselves for me. Not to mention that I took a flight that was how many hours long. So that's why I say like probably not my anxiety. I think it's responding to these other feelings that I'm experiencing. So that was the root of my comment.
Yes, which I really appreciate. And I agree. Like,
Yeah.
what is the root? Because often it's something like it's anger or grief or
Yes.
something that I would think it would be fear. Just from
Yeah.
all of my training, I would think, oh, this is a fear-based response.
Mm.
But I also know that when a body doesn't have the inputs that it needs, like sunlight, for electrons, the
Yep.
things that we need to actually recharge our body if we're never putting our skin on the earth's surface, then the body is going to present with some stuff, and it
Hmm.
often looks like anxiety. It will
Yep.
present as anxiousness or
Absolutely.
fatigue or complete burnout and all the things. So those, you're right, I mean, it's just a symptom. It's a
Hmm.
physiological response to something else going on. And I
Yeah.
do think it's helpful to dig a little deeper. Like, and that was like your point too. In
Yeah.
your response is like,
Yeah.
if you go a little deeper and go like, what's really happening? Like, I'm actually really sad right now. And
Yeah.
it's presenting itself as, anxious feelings.
The really, really uncomfortable feelings of anxiety. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons too, because I did so much work with my therapist at the time, at the beginning of my
Mhm.
journey, I labeled everything. Every emotion was anxiety.
Right.
So that's where I try to like catch people. Like, stop labeling this fear as anxiety. Stop labeling this excitement as anxiety. Stop labeling this grief as anxiety. So I'm constantly like challenging people, like, we've given this, we're giving so much power to the word anxiety instead of like truly labeling what you're actually feeling, what that emotion really is. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And to your point, I was just my son was saying, I don't think people really understand what anxiety is. And I don't think people really have and I think for me, trying to put some language that people, because when you're closed and
mhm.
what you know is anxiety, you're going to be like, oh, what does somebody have to say about that? Because that's the right. So at least
Yep.
it's a starting point. So there's where I feel like there's a little
Yeah.
bit of a like, what do you call it then? And
Yeah.
how do you get people's attention when they're closed? But
Right.
they could really benefit from understanding a little bit more. And I
Yeah.
don't think, we're so incredibly built. Like the human body is so magnificent that when we have symptoms, the body is already trying
Yeah.
to fix things. We are
Yep.
already we've already moved to healing.
Yep.
So, and we're busy trying to get rid of the symptoms. But
We're
it's like,
fighting it.
wait a minute.
Yeah.
What if we work with the body to figure
Yeah.
out like what it's trying to communicate and how to help balance things because it's already helping you if you
No,
have
it's so
a
true.
symptom.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah. But it's, for years, it was like, I got to get rid of this and I got to get rid of
Yeah.
that.
Do you
Yeah.
mind me asking, just out of curiosity, do you mind
Yeah.
me asking what were you experiencing? Do you recall physiologically when when you were
Oh,
doing
in
at
the
the BVI?
I'm trying to remember because it wasn't the typical, like I wasn't having the heart racing or anything. I think it was for me a lot of worry. Like
Mm,
it turns into like this mom worry thing where I'm worried there was a big boat that's docked where it's a restaurant and all
mhm.
these kids were jumping off of it, little bitties were
Mhm.
jumping off of it and they were having so much fun and they were like, "Yeah." And I was worried about it. I was anxious about it. And I'm like, these are not A, not my children. B, like that kind of thing where it's like I
Yeah,
couldn't really stop myself from worrying about things that were none of my business.
yeah, yeah.
So, it was a lot of that, and I was nitpicky. I was
Yep,
a little more irritable and kinda nitpicky about things, and I couldn't really get satisfied with, like, what I wanted. I mean, it was just that more of that
yeah. So
kind of stuff,
interesting. Yeah,
right?
I completely resonate with that. What I whenever I was on my trip in Rome and
Yeah,
was experiencing it, what I would typically do or how it would start, which would trigger the symptom, the physiological feeling is I call it the hamster wheel, in the
uh-huh,
brain. Like you put this
mhm,
thought in there and it just spins and spins and you're just like spinning it around like a
yeah,
hamster, and it's never a thought that's serving you, right? It's
yes,
a thought based out of fear or worry or any of those kinds of things,
yeah,
and it's you've toggled it around so much of your mind that it starts to
create,
yeah,
mhm,
create these physiological symptoms of anxiety. So I was
yes,
just curious what you were
exactly,
feeling.
that's such a good yeah, that's exactly what happens,
Yeah.
and I really think of, from a sort of a metaphysical, spiritual perspective, there's really there are two main emotions, love and fear. And if it's not love, then it's coming from a place of fear. And then it's going to, and if you get a fear based thought going or a fear based, it's going to start the whole. And I think of us, I used to think that a thought created the feeling. And then the more I worked with the people, and then the more I was like, no, I really feel like we're feeling beings
Yeah.
that occasionally think like the thoughts are important, but I feel like we're more of a feeling
Mhm.
species. So, yeah, and then to not even necessarily be aware of it, and then a thought gets going, and then it's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, but we're not against feeling.
No, not at
So,
all.
right?
No, it's
So
very important.
I wanted to just say, how do you, when that stuff gets going now, if
What
it
do I
does get
do?
going
Yeah.
now, yeah, like what do
My
you have to
go-tos.
share about that?
So I agree with what you said about really the feelings coming first. And then what kind of programming have we had that create a thought based on that feeling, right? Because if it's programming that isn't right, or it's someone else's programming like our parents or our grandparents or any of that kind of stuff, that we then create this thought which then dictates our behavior right, and
Right.
it's just kind of like self-fulfilling prophecy that ends up happening. So if a feeling presents itself and then these thoughts start to happen, what different story can I tell myself? And that's really where reframing comes in. I would venture to say that, challenging those, my anxiety, or
Yeah.
I have anxiety, that, changing what comes after that is a reframe. It can just be as simple as that. But it's just like interrupting, like pattern interrupting, what the brain is trying to tell you, especially if it's, a lot of the stories that still try to present themselves to me, they've been they've been presenting since the very beginning. We're 20 years in on this.
Right.
But once you start to really like get into this work and realize like, no, we're not digging up these old stories
Yep.
anymore. Let's
Mhm.
reframe it to something else. So it's what do I want that to manifest as? What other story do I want to tell myself? What if this is, maybe this isn't family history. What else could be, contributing? Maybe I just need to get out into, it's really pattern interrupting and reframing are my go-tos.
Yeah.
Um, for really kind of shifting the mindset when those things start to present itself. But then, getting outside, connecting with nature, and sitting on the ground, and getting in sunlight, those are all things that not only support the pattern interrupting and the reframing, but they also like have so many other benefits far exceed even just that, and they both complement each other so well.
Right. Physiologically. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just also to me, that's a bunch of safety signaling.
Yeah.
So you're actually changing the danger signaling that's going on in the nervous system to
Absolutely.
more safety signals. It's like,
Yeah.
okay. And I think it's a process, right? I don't feel like my journey obviously is anywhere near done here. It's not like
No, I
you
hope
check a
not.
box and say, "Oh,
Absolutely.
I'm done with that." It's this always learning and processing and being like, "Oh, yeah." And I think if you can stay open, like just stay open, and especially when something like the first book where you were like, "Sugar, what is wrong with this person? Sarah," whatever. It's like, okay, if you can even then go, "Oh, that's funny. Like,
Yeah.
why am I having such a strong reaction here? This is," and just it's all kind of funny, not when you're in the midst of it and it feels horrible and you feel like you're dying.
Mhm.
But if you can have a sense of humor of like, "Oh, my mind's just making up a story here.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh
this is
gosh,
what we
absolutely.
do." And I just feel like it's really difficult in the moment, but if you can stay open,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
I completely agree. But when we're in that like fight or flight, we're
yes.
not in our like logical, right? We're not in the logical part of our brain. We're in the survival part of our
Yeah,
brain.
we're
So
on
it's difficult,
fire.
right? It's difficult to do that. We're not saying, that it's not.
Right.
Um, it's funny, you were saying something and it made me think like I almost want to go back to the very first clients that I worked with and like, can we start over?
Yeah, sorry.
because
Yeah,
because we're constantly evolving as practitioners and even just the work that we do on ourselves, right? And we're constantly testing and seeing what's working and adding more tools to the toolbox. And I'm with you. I don't ever want to stop evolving and growing. I always want to maintain this bit of openness and curiosity because it just means that I can reach more people and we can help more people. I
yeah,
completely agree.
yeah. Well, what else? I'm just so grateful that you came on the show and that
Thank
we're
you.
talking about this. And I just wondered, what else really nourishes your body, mind, soul these days?
Oh gosh. Well, the primary thing for me is the relationship that I have with my husband. So
Yeah,
that connection, I think is a huge piece. And, for other people, it may not be a significant other. It could be friends, or it could be, the community that you're in. So just having this support system that nothing can rock. That for
mhm.
me is just has been so amazing. And I've had it, thank God, I've had it for as long as I've had. I've been with my husband since I was 17 and he was 19. So we're coming up on 25 years, 24
Aw,
years this year.
that's
Yeah.
sweet. Yeah,
So, and it's just absolutely amazing. So that is such a huge piece, but find what that means for you. Find
okay.
what that looks like for you. Again, I think community and having this support system and someone to be able to talk about these things with and
Yeah,
do some of these things with is so, so important. It's that accountability. It's, just being able to talk about things as they come up. It's one of the reasons why I've connected with so many amazing people like you just through like social media. Blech, I hate social media,
I
but
know.
it's led me to some of the most amazing people that I connect with. And like right now it's just virtually, but one day it will be, in person in the future. And it's been so, so healing and profound for me. And so I really, really encourage people to include that, and
Community.
find that for them, whatever that looks like.
Yes, yes. Find the people that are trying to do what you're trying to do, that
Yeah.
resonate with you, that are positive influences, and also, like, that can check you on things. Because
Yeah.
I like that we can do that with each other, and that's great.
Yeah.
That's what we need. So, yeah, community, and it's so cute. You and your husband are so cute together
Thank
anyway.
you.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah, so it's really fun. I didn't know you guys were, um, teenage
It's been a long time.
sweethearts, right?
Yeah.
So
It's been a
that's
long
so
time.
cute. So he's seen the whole thing, so he
He
could
has. He has, bless his heart. Um, he and yeah, I don't always, but I sometimes will ask him like if I look back at old pictures or I have just a vivid memory of going through something like really, really difficult. I'm just like, I don't know how you did it. Like, how did you do it? How did you just like I don't even know what his response usually is. It's just this unwavering support.
Mhm.
I'm just so blessed that, he's just my complete and utter best friend. And there's honestly, I've thrown so much at him. Apparently there's nothing I can do to get him away from me. It's funny. And I know we're wrapping this up, but I'll just, you feel free to cut this, but it's funny that it's almost like, especially whenever I was in the thralls of anxiety, it's
Yeah.
almost like my brain would try to do things to be like, because it was such a safe relationship. It's always been such a safe relationship. And if
Mhm.
you don't come from a place of knowing safety or being, you can't trust it, right? Like eventually the shoe's gonna fall. Like
Right.
let's hurry up and get this on the road. Like so, but it was just this unwavering support. He's just always been my rock, and I'm so blessed to have him.
You are very lucky. Yes. That is yeah, I'm so glad you shared that. We're not cutting that. Yeah, but I would love to have you. I know we're gonna do a live together. We're gonna let's do some other things together because I love collaborating and I loved having you on the show.
Thank
Love to
you.
have you anytime. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so good to finally like dig into this with you. I
Yeah,
really enjoyed it,
it's
Kelly.
a long time coming.
It
Like we
has.
needed to do it. Yeah.